The restaurant lights glinted off the engagement ring on Brenda's finger. A new ring, certainly not the one I'd given her. She laughed, a brittle sound, as Earl Thompson's arm draped over her shoulder. Then he met my eyes across the crowded room, a smirk playing on his lips, and squeezed her tighter. "Some men just aren't cut out for family life, Hank," he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. The hurricane had been a monster, churning for days in the Gulf. They'd pulled us off the rig early, the company unwilling to risk equipment or lives against a Category 4. 14 months I'd been out there, a record stretch even for me. The saltwater smell was in my clothes, in my hair, deep in my pores. It felt like I'd forgotten what dry land was supposed to be like, what a normal bed felt like. I was tired, worn down to the bone, contemplating early retirement before I even stepped foot off the plane. The money was good, always had been, but the toll it took on Brenda, on Caleb and Lily, was starting to feel too high. Now, I was in the Tampa airport, surrounded by the usual blend of frantic travelers and slow-moving tourists. My plane to St. Louis was delayed, pushing my surprise homecoming back a few hours. I leaned against a cold window, watching rain lash against the tarmac. I pictured Brenda's face when I walked through the door, the kids rushing at me. Caleb would be taller, I was sure. Lily, my little buttercup, probably had new braces. The thought brought a small, private smile to my face. This was what kept me going, the thought of them. My phone buzzed. It was Lily. A text, not a call. "Dad, when you get a chance, give me a call." A strange message. Lily usually called outright or FaceTimed, rambling about school or her friends. This formality felt off. My gut tightened a little, but I pushed it down. Kids sometimes got weird with text. I called her immediately. "Hey, Buttercup," I said, trying to inject some cheer into my voice as soon as she answered. The airport noise was a dull roar around me. There was a pause on the other end, a silence that stretched too long. It wasn't a bad connection. It was hesitant. "Hey, Dad." Her voice was small, tight. "Everything all right?" I asked, a hint of concern creeping in. My surprise was already starting to deflate. I, I don't know where to start, Dad." She sounded like she was trying to hold back tears. My brow furrowed. "Well, how about the bare facts then? Give me the headlines." I tried to keep it light, a common phrase we used when she had a big story to tell and got tangled up. Then it came, a sudden rapid-fire burst of words that hit me like a physical blow. "Caleb's in the hospital, shot. Earl Thompson is in jail on attempted murder charges, and Aunt Mary finally gave birth, and she's 3 months pregnant again." My grip on the phone tightened. The plane I was supposed to be on was still sitting at the gate, its lights reflecting in the wet pavement. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Are you kidding me, Lily? That sounds unbelievable." My voice was a flat whisper. It couldn't be true. It sounded like something out of a bad television show. "Well, you said you wanted the bare facts," she replied, her voice steady now, almost defiant. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Is is Caleb okay?" I managed, my throat suddenly dry. "He's stable. He's been in for 3 days. Mom's with him." 3 days. I'd been unreachable for a good part of that, out in the middle of nowhere. My fault. Always my fault. "Listen, Dad," Lily continued, her tone shifting, becoming more serious. "Mom will tell you what she wants you to hear and possibly believe." The caution in her voice was unmistakable. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a warning. Then she dropped another stone into the rapidly muddling waters of my mind. The whole situation with my brother, aunt, and uncle is also related to her. The connection hung in the air, unexplained, ominous. My world, which had been settling into the comfortable rhythm of anticipated reunion, began to tilt. Shot? Earl Thompson? My Aunt Mary? All of it related to Brenda? The pieces didn't fit, not yet, but the implications were heavy, a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. The thought of Brenda's face, the joyful reunion, vanished. It was replaced by a hollow ache. I walked over to the airline counter, my legs feeling strangely heavy. "I need the next flight to St. Louis," I told the agent, my voice devoid of emotion. Doesn't matter yet. The surprise was gone. Only a cold dread remained. The St. Louis air hit me, thick and wet, a humid blanket after the dry chill of the plane cabin. No salt, no ocean roar, just the distant hum of traffic and the smell of cut grass and damp earth. It was familiar, yet alien, a world away from the steel platforms and endless horizon I'd left behind. My old pickup, parked for 14 months at a lot near the airport, started with a grumpy cough, but it ran. I drove west, the landscape flattening into fields of ripening corn, the familiar landmarks of home blurring past. There was no joy in this return, only a growing unease. The hospital sign loomed, stark against the gray afternoon sky. Inside, the antiseptic smell was immediate and overwhelming. Lily was waiting in the hallway outside what I assumed was Caleb's room, slumped in a plastic chair. She looked thin, her eyes shadowed with worry, a pale imitation of the vibrant girl I remembered. "Hey, Buttercup," I said, my voice hoarse. I pulled her into a hug. She felt fragile in my arms. "Dad," she whispered, her voice muffled against my shoulder. She pulled back, wiping at her eyes. "He's stable." The bullet went through his shoulder. "They said it's a clean wound, but he lost a lot of blood. He had surgery yesterday." "Stable," I repeated, the words sounding hollow. "Thank God." I looked toward the closed door. "Can I see him?" Lily nodded. "He's been in and out. They gave him something for the pain." She lowered her voice, glancing around the sterile hallway. "Mom's been acting strange, Dad, not herself." Her gaze met mine, full of an unspoken warning. "She's been keeping things quiet." Before I could ask more, Brenda appeared at the end of the hallway, pushing through the double doors. She wore a neat blouse and slacks, her hair perfectly in place, as if she'd just come from a casual lunch, not days at a hospital. Her eyes, when they met mine, held no surprise, no warmth, just a flicker of something unreadable, quickly veiled. "Hank," she said, her voice flat. She gave me a brief, almost perfunctory hug, barely touching me. Her body was stiff. "You made good time." "I got the first flight I could," I replied, my voice tighter than I intended. "What the hell happened, Brenda? Why is Earl in jail? Why was Caleb shot?" I needed answers, something concrete to hold on to. She waved a dismissive hand, a familiar gesture that always grated on me. "It was just a neighborhood misunderstanding, Hank. Earl just has a temper. You know how he is. And Caleb, well, he got in the middle of it." "Got in the middle of what?" I pressed, my gaze steady on her face. Her eyes darted away, fixed on a spot on the wall behind me. "Just an argument," she said, her voice raising slightly. "Things got out of hand. You know how men are. Best we don't air our dirty laundry, Hank. It's complicated." "Complicated," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "Caleb is in there with a bullet wound, and Earl Thompson is in jail, and you're telling me it's complicated?" She met my gaze then, briefly, a flash of defensiveness. "What do you want me to say? It happened. Caleb's going to be fine. That's what matters now." She avoided any specifics, any real explanation. Her answers were like trying to catch smoke. I watched her, the way she clasped her hands in front of her, the way her shoulders were slightly hunched, almost protective. There was a distance in her, a wall. It wasn't the Brenda I'd left, not fully. The cold dread from the airport began to solidify. "I need to see him," I stated, walking past her towards Caleb's door. Inside, the room was dim, quiet. Caleb lay pale against the white sheets, an IV drip running into his arm. His right shoulder was heavily bandaged, a faint crimson stain visible through the gauze. He looked so small, so vulnerable. "My son." "Caleb," I said softly, sitting by his bed. His eyes fluttered open, hazy with medication. He blinked a few times, trying to focus. "Dad?" His voice was weak, barely a whisper. "It's me, son," I said, taking his uninjured hand. It felt clammy and frail. "What happened here? Tell me." He frowned, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "Earl, he was arguing with Mom and Aunt Mary." His words were slurred, disconnected. "Something about money and Aunt Mary's baby." He trailed off, his eyes closing again, the effort clearly too much. He lost it. He drifted back to sleep, leaving me with those few fractured words. Earl, Mom, Aunt Mary, money, the baby. It clicked into place with Lily's warning, with Brenda's evasiveness. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't just a neighborhood misunderstanding. This was something deeper, something rotten right at the core of my family. Leaving the hospital, the distance between Brenda and me was palpable, a chasm that had widened with every evasive answer she'd given. She walked ahead, her back straight, not looking back. I followed, the weight of Caleb's whispered words pressing down on me. She barely acknowledged me in the truck, fiddling with the radio, flipping through stations without settling on one. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the hum of the tires on the asphalt. It wasn't the silence of shared understanding, but of unstated accusation and hidden truths. We pulled into the driveway of our house, a quiet street lined with mature oak trees. It was a good house, too big for us now that the kids were older, but it had always felt like home. Now, seeing it through the lens of Lily's warnings and Caleb's fragments, it felt alien, a facade. Brenda walked inside without a word, disappearing into the kitchen. I stood in the living room, the familiar furniture suddenly feeling foreign, out of place. The air was still, too still. Lily found me there, hovering by the mantelpiece, my fingers tracing the outline of an old family photo. She had a tissue crumpled in her hand. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Dad," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's more." I turned, waiting, bracing myself. I felt like I was standing on shifting sand. She took a deep breath, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond my shoulder. "Mom's been seeing Earl, Dad, for a long time." The words hit me like a physical blow, not a loud one, but a deep internal shockwave. The air left my lungs. My mind recoiled, refusing to process it. "No, that ain't right, Lily." My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Earl Thompson, my neighbor, my friend, Brenda." It was impossible. "It is, Dad," she insisted, her voice gaining strength, tears welling up in her eyes again. "It started after you left last time, I think. She'd get dressed up, say she was going to her book club or out with friends, but she'd be gone for hours, sometimes all night. She started staying out late, later and later, and Earl would be around, always around. Sometimes his truck would be parked down the street, and she'd sneak out. She painted a picture I hadn't seen, couldn't have seen, from an oil rig hundreds of miles away. Brenda's sudden interest in her appearance, new clothes, new haircut, hushed phone calls she'd end quickly when I called home. I dismissed them as her finding new routines, new interests, a way to cope with my long absences. I told myself it was good for her to get out. My last visit home, 6 months ago, I'd noticed a certain lightness in her, a quick, almost nervous laugh when Earl was around. I'd brushed it off then, attributed it to the general ease of a friendly neighbor. But now, those small anomalies, those tiny shifts, coalesced into a damning mosaic. A memory flashed, unwelcome and sharp. Mary Thompson, Earl's wife. Gentle, quiet Mary. I'd always felt a fleeting, inappropriate attraction to her whenever our families socialized. She had a kindness about her, a warmth that Brenda sometimes lacked. I'd always pushed it aside, a married man with a family. But now the irony of my own suppressed thoughts stung. "Caleb caught them, Dad," Lily continued, her voice trembling. "He saw them at Earl's place, in the garage, I think. He confronted Mom about it a few days before the shooting. They had a huge fight. Caleb was so mad. He said he was going to tell you everything." Her voice broke, a sob escaping. "That's why Earl shot him, Dad. He was trying to silence him." The revelation landed with the force of a hammer blow. Caleb, my son, shot for trying to protect me, for trying to do what was right. And Mary, Earl's wife, carrying his child, while he was doing this to us. To Brenda, to me, to Caleb, to Lily. The tangled threads, the deceit, the adultery, the violence, the cold, brutal consequences. It was all laid bare. A hot surge of rage, raw and visceral, coursed through me, tightening my jaw. Then just as quickly it receded, replaced by a cold, numbing despair that settled deep in my bones. My family, my home. It was all a lie, all of it. I stood there, feeling the weight of the betrayal, the intricate web of lies that had been spun while I was away. I needed to confront Brenda. I knew that. But first, I needed to understand every last, ugly detail of this mess. I needed to see it all, clear and plain, before I could begin to figure out how to tear it all down. The quiet house felt colder than any rig I'd ever been on. Lily had gone to her room, leaving me alone in the living room, surrounded by the ghosts of what I thought my life was. Every ticking clock, every creak of the old house amplified the tension. I sat in my armchair, the one I always used, the fabric worn smooth from years of use. My hands were clasped, knuckles white. The story Lily told spun around in my head, a vicious, tangled mess. The front door opened and Brenda walked in. She set her purse down on the hall table, her movements precise, almost mechanical. The following days were a blur of sterile rooms and cold questions. Local police officers, stern-faced and methodical, took statements. First they spoke with me, then with Brenda, and finally with Lily. I laid out the facts as I knew them, the bare bones, careful to include Lily's revelations in Brenda's subsequent confession. The prosecutor, a young woman named Ms. Evans, listened with a clipboard in her lap, her eyes sharp and unwavering. Brenda, on the other hand, was less direct, often breaking down or resorting to generalities, though she couldn't retract her previous admissions. Her story, however reluctant, solidified their case against Earl Thompson. He was officially charged with aggravated assault and attempted murder. The words felt heavy, final. My visits to Caleb's hospital room became a daily ritual. He was mending, slowly, the wound clean, but his body was still weak, his spirit dimmed. Explaining everything to him was a burden I dreaded. How do you tell your son that his mother betrayed you, that his friend tried to kill him because of it? I kept it simple for now. Earl was angry, son. Things got out of hand. You were in the wrong place. He didn't push. He just nodded, his eyes distant, lost in the fog of pain medication and trauma. The full truth would have to wait. I caught glimpses of Mary Thompson in the hospital waiting room. She looked utterly lost, her face pale, her pregnancy visibly advanced. She sat alone, often crying quietly into a tissue. She still had no idea about Brenda and Earl. I could see the confusion and fear in her eyes, the shock of her husband's arrest, the worry for her unborn child. My anger at Earl, already a burning ember, intensified. To betray not just me and my family, but his own wife, his own child in such a cruel way. It was beyond comprehension. Lily, meanwhile, clung to me. She was a constant shadow, her silent presence, a quiet comfort in the chaos. We sat together, often just listening to the television, or sometimes she'd talk about school, about anything but the disaster that had befallen us. In those moments, I felt a flicker of the father I wanted to be, the anchor she needed. Her strength, her simple honesty, was the only clear thing in a world gone blurry. The news spread through Harvest County like a prairie fire. Whispers turned to outright gossip at the grocery store, at church, at the gas station. Our name, Earl's name, Brenda's name, became common currency, exchanged with knowing glances and hushed tones. It was a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Now our dirty laundry was aired for all to see, picked apart for sport. The shame of it was a bitter taste in my mouth. I called an attorney, a no-nonsense man named Roger Miller, known for his work in difficult divorces. We met in his quiet office, the walls lined with legal tomes. I laid out my financial details, the careful accounts, the investments I'd built over 20 years on the rig. Roger listened, nodding occasionally. My money was offshore, well managed. It had been my security, my family's future. Now it felt like just another casualty, like all those years of bone-weary labor, the missed birthdays, the lonely holidays, had been for nothing. All for a life that was a lie. You see, life has a way of twisting, of showing you that even your most deliberate choices can lead to unforeseen and often brutal consequences. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Brenda tried to bridge the gap between us. She found me in the kitchen one evening making coffee. "Hank," she started, her voice soft, pleading. "I'm so sorry. I know I messed up. Can't we, can't we fix this?" She reached for my arm. I pulled away almost imperceptibly. The chasm was too wide, too deep. Her words were hollow, ringing false in my ears. I felt nothing but a profound emptiness when I looked at her. No anger, no love, just a cold, blank space where she used to be. "There's nothing to fix, Brenda," I said, my voice flat, and walked out of the room. Earl's initial court hearings were a public spectacle. The small courtroom was packed with curious townsfolk, reporters from the local paper, and families from both sides. Earl sat at the defense table, his face devoid of expression, a ghost of the man who had been my neighbor. The shame felt suffocating. I eventually went to see Earl in jail. The visit was arranged by my lawyer. The room was small, separated by thick glass, our voices distorted by the phone receiver. He looked thinner, his eyes hard. "Why, Earl?" I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "Why Caleb?" He shrugged, a dismissive gesture. "Kid got in the way. He was gonna ruin everything." There was no remorse, no flicker of regret in his eyes. Just a cold, calculating self-preservation. He blamed Caleb, blamed Brenda, blamed the situation. He blamed everyone but himself. The man I thought I knew was truly gone. The conversation with Earl in jail had left a cold residue, a hard certainty that he felt no remorse. It also solidified a different kind of duty in my mind. Mary. She was still in the dark, still believing her husband was merely a victim of a misunderstanding, as Brenda had tried to frame it. She deserved to know the truth, however ugly. It was a cold comfort, but it was a truth she needed for her own sake, for her own future. I found her at home, her small, neat house on the corner, just down the street from ours. Her car was in the driveway, and the faint smell of baking bread, usually a welcoming scent, now seemed painfully out of place. Her pregnancy was far along, her belly round beneath a loose-fitting dress. She opened the door, her eyes wide with surprise, then concern. "Hank," she said, her voice a soft query, "is everything all right? Is Caleb worse?" "Caleb's stable, Mary," I assured her, stepping inside as she gestured. The living room was spotless, filled with framed family photos. Earl smiling beside Mary, Caleb and Lily at a barbecue. Ghosts. "I need to talk to you about something important." She sat on the edge of her sofa, her hands clasped over her belly. "It's about Earl, isn't it? He says he didn't mean to hurt Caleb. He says it was an accident." Her voice was defensive, clinging to a desperate hope. "Mary," I began, choosing my words carefully, like stepping stones across a rushing river. "What I'm about to tell you, it's going to be hard. But you deserve to know." I looked at the framed photos, at her trusting face. "Earl and Brenda, they've been having an affair." The color drained from her face, leaving her impossibly pale. Her hands flew to her mouth, stifling a small gasp. Her eyes, wide and disbelieving, fixed on mine. "No," she whispered, shaking her head slowly. "No, Hank, that's not true. Earl wouldn't. Brenda wouldn't." "It is true, Mary. Lily told me." Brenda confessed. Caleb caught them together. "That's why Earl shot him. He was trying to keep Caleb quiet." The words felt brutal, stark, stripped of any softening. I watched as her world crumbled before my eyes. Tears welled up, spilling down her cheeks, but she didn't sob. It was a quiet, profound devastation. "He used me, Hank. All this time, he used me." The words were barely audible, thick with heartbreak. "My miracle baby. All the doctors, all the prayers. He said he wanted to give me a child. He said he was doing it for us." The full, horrifying truth of Earl's manipulation hit her then. Her miracle pregnancy, after years of heartache and fertility treatments, had been nothing but a cold, calculated act. Earl sleeping with Brenda, then coming home to Mary, providing the gift of a child while maintaining his deceit. He had betrayed both women, living a double life built on a foundation of lies. The baby, a symbol of hope, now became a stark reminder of his treachery. The scandal was no longer just whispers. With Brenda's confession and now Mary's knowledge, the small town of Harvest County erupted. People took sides, openly debating the details in grocery aisles and church parking lots. Some blamed Brenda, some blamed Earl, some even blamed me for being absent. The quiet life I had built, the respectable reputation of the Miller family, was shattered, scattered like dust. The shame was a constant companion, a tightening in my chest. Caleb, now clearer-headed, began to understand more. He struggled with anger, a quiet, simmering rage directed at his mother. He barely spoke to Brenda, his eyes accusing. The boy who had loved his mother unconditionally now saw her through a lens of betrayal. Lily tried to mediate, to bring a semblance of peace to the house, but the rift was too deep, too wide. Her attempts were met with a stony silence from Brenda and a quiet resignation from me. The children, innocent victims, were left to grapple with their parents' choices, questioning everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and family. Mary, in the wake of the truth, made swift, quiet decisions. I saw her packing a few days later, her small car loaded with boxes. She looked stronger somehow, despite the pain. She was moving in with her sister in the next county, away from the gossip, away from the ghost of Earl. She needed a new start, a place where her child wouldn't be born into the shadow of scandal. The baby, due in a few weeks, was now a painful symbol, but also a new beginning, a testament to her quiet strength in the face of such devastating treachery. The trial of Earl Thompson commenced 3 months later, a raw, exposed nerve in the heart of our quiet town. The small courtroom was packed every day, a testament to the community's morbid curiosity. It was a tense, emotionally draining spectacle, drawing out every ugly detail of the affair, the betrayal and the violence. I sat in the front row beside Lily, our presence a silent show of support for Caleb and a condemnation of Earl. Brenda was called to testify. She walked to the stand, her usual poise replaced by a fragile vulnerability. Under oath, she was forced to recount the affair, her voice often barely audible. Her public confession, wrung out by the prosecutor's sharp questions, felt like another layer of humiliation, not just for her, but for all of us. Her face was flushed, her eyes downcast. She looked small, diminished, stripped bare in front of everyone who had ever known her. Caleb, still limping slightly, his shoulder a constant ache, delivered his testimony with a quiet dignity. He described finding his mother and Earl, the argument that followed, in the moment the gun went off. His words were precise, unembellished, painting a clear picture of Earl's desperate attempt to silence him. He looked at Earl across the courtroom, his young face etched with anger and sorrow, a powerful witness to the betrayal. Mary was there too, a figure of silent suffering, seated far back in the gallery. Her baby, a healthy girl, was now a few weeks old, nestled in a carrier beside her sister. Mary's presence, the quiet strength in her grieving eyes, was perhaps the most powerful indictment of Earl. She never spoke, never made a sound, but her broken heart was palpable, a silent scream of betrayal. Earl's defense team tried to paint Caleb as aggressive, claiming self-defense in the heat of a volatile argument. They twisted the narrative, suggesting Caleb had lunged, had provoked. But the evidence meticulously presented by Prosecutor Evans was strong. She highlighted Earl's history of temper, Brenda's confession, and the trajectory of the bullet. She spoke of premeditation, of a desperate man trying to protect a secret that would ruin his life. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Every minute felt like an hour. Finally, they returned. A tense silence fell over the courtroom. The foreman read the verdict: guilty of aggravated assault, not guilty of attempted murder. The intent, they decided, was hard to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. It was an argument, a struggle, a moment of panic, not a cold, calculated attempt to kill. A grim satisfaction settled over me. It wasn't full justice, not for Caleb, not for Mary, not for the years of lies. But it was something. Earl would serve time. It was a cold comfort, though, a small victory in a war that had left us all scarred. The damage was done, irreparable. The sentencing came a few weeks later, 10 years in state prison. It brought a semblance of closure, a finality to the legal ordeal. But the emotional wounds remained raw, festering beneath the surface of our lives. Brenda found herself ostracized. Neighbors who once chatted over fences now averted their gaze. Invitations to community events ceased. Her bridge club, her volunteer work, her entire social life dissolved around her. She lived a solitary existence within the town that once embraced her, a pariah in the place she called home. Our household, meanwhile, was a landscape of unspoken tension. Brenda and I lived separate lives under the same roof, bound by the children but nothing else. We moved through the house like ghosts, avoiding each other's eyes, speaking only in necessary fragments. The bed was mine alone. Her things were in the guest room. The quiet life I had once cherished, the home I had worked so hard to provide, was now just a shell, a monument to broken trust. The divorce proceedings began, a slow, methodical unraveling of 20 years. It was painful, every document a reminder of promises broken, dreams shattered. But it was also necessary, a clean break. I worked closely with Roger, ensuring that the division of assets was fair, particularly for the children. My years offshore, the carefully managed investments, were now focused solely on Caleb and Lily's future, their college funds, their eventual independence. That much, at least, I could secure. Caleb struggled. The bullet wound healed, leaving a jagged scar on his shoulder, a constant physical reminder. But the emotional scars ran deeper. He started therapy, sessions twice a week. He talked about his anger, his confusion, his feeling of betrayal. He was still quiet, often withdrawn, but the slow, painful process of healing had begun. I made sure I was there for him, every step, trying to be the steady presence I hadn't always been. Lily, in her own way, began to find her footing. She threw herself into her studies, into her art. She became fiercely independent, a young woman determined to forge her own path, consciously learning from the wreckage of her parents' choices. She saw the cost, the devastation. She understood what I couldn't articulate, that some mistakes leave craters. She watched and she learned and she grew, quietly, powerfully. Mary, too, was rebuilding. She had moved to her sister's in the next county, a fresh start. We kept in touch, occasional phone calls. Her daughter, a spitting image of Mary, was thriving. Mary was working part-time, going to night school, finding a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She was a single mother, yes, but she was free, choosing a life defined by her own choices, not by Earl's treachery. She was proof that even after the deepest betrayals, life found a way to move forward. The house, once a symbol of our family, now felt like a mausoleum. Every room held a memory tainted by the revelations. Brenda's absence from my life, even as she moved through the guest room, was a physical thing. I started to consider selling it, a new place, a smaller place, something that wasn't haunted by the ghost of what we once were. I started reaching out to old friends, men I'd worked with on the rig or guys from high school I'd lost touch with. We'd meet for coffee or a beer, talk about nothing important, just the everyday hum of life. It was a way to ground myself, to find perspective outside the suffocating drama of my own family. Their normal lives, their mundane worries, were a balm. Brenda tried to create a new life for herself in Harvest County, but the consequences of her choices were inescapable. The ostracism continued. She found a job at a small boutique outside of town where fewer people knew her story. Her laughter was gone, replaced by a quiet stoicism. She was a shadow of her former self, a woman forever marked by her mistakes, living a life of quiet penance. Harvest County itself was forever changed. The scandal had ripped through its polite veneer, exposing the darker undercurrents of human nature. Trust was broken, friendships fractured. It was a stark reminder that even in the quiet heartland, lives could unravel with a brutal, public force. I spent long nights alone, sitting on the porch, watching the stars, reflecting on it all. My ambition, my drive to provide, had taken me away. My absence had created a void, and Earl had filled it. Infidelity. It felt like such a simple word for such a catastrophic force. It wasn't just about sex, it was about trust, about shared history, about the fundamental promise you make to another person. I had believed that my hard work, my carefully managed finances could protect my family, could build a secure future. I had been wrong. Money and security, I realized, were just paper and numbers. They offered no shield against the most fundamental human betrayals. The quiet, corrosive acts that could shatter lives more completely than any hurricane. The real cost, I understood, was paid in shattered trust, in lost innocence, in the quiet, enduring pain of knowing what once was and what could never be again. Months blurred into a year. The initial shock waves from Earl Thompson's trial and the subsequent revelations had subsided, but the landscape of our lives and the very fabric of Harvest County was permanently altered. The dust had settled as much as it could, leaving behind a new, quieter reality. My divorce from Brenda was finalized in a stark, efficient courtroom. It was less a moment of triumph and more one of weary acceptance. The legal papers made it official, drawing a clear line where once there had been a tangled mess. Soon after I put the house on the market, it sold quickly to a young family eager for a fresh start. Walking out for the last time, the empty rooms echoed with more than just my footsteps. They held the silent ghosts of what had been and what would never be again. I bought a smaller place on the edge of town, a quiet bungalow with a manageable yard. It felt less like a home and more like a haven, a place to simply be. I officially retired from the oil rigs. The decision, once fraught with financial considerations and a sense of duty, now felt like a liberation. The lure of the big money had dimmed, replaced by a deep desire for a quieter life, one closer to my children, to the simple rhythms of the land. I took on some carpentry work, small jobs for neighbors, the kind of work that used my hands but didn't take me away. Caleb, though still bearing the scar on his shoulder, found strength in his recovery. The therapy helped, slowly unearthing the anger and confusion. He started going to the community college, taking classes in automotive repair, his focus now firmly on his future. He was healing gradually, one day at a time, building a life for himself that was his own. He spoke less about the past, more about the engines he was fixing, the plans he was making. Lily, my buttercup, proved to be the most resilient of us all. She thrived, excelling in school, her independence shining brighter with each passing month. She moved out for college, a state university a few hours away, eager to carve her own path. She maintained strong bonds with both Brendan and me, a testament to her unique strength, her refusal to let our mistakes define her. She visited us separately, listening, offering her quiet presence. Mary, with her baby Sarah, had built a new life for herself in the next county. She was working, raising her daughter, and finding a quiet joy in her independence. We occasionally met for coffee, talking about normal things, about our children, about the weather. She was free from the shadow of deceit, building a future rooted in honesty, a testament to her quiet strength. Her baby, once a symbol of Earl's treachery, was now simply her daughter, a source of unwavering love. I saw Brenda occasionally in the grocery store, at a parent-teacher conference for Lily. Our interactions were polite, always, but emotionally barren, like two strangers making small talk. There was no anger left, just an empty space where our life together had once been. We existed on separate planes, acknowledging each other's presence but without connection. The moral price had been steep, paid by everyone involved. Earl was in prison, Brenda was a pariah. Mary had lost her husband and her home. Caleb carried the physical and emotional scars. Lily had witnessed the unraveling of her family, and I had lost the life I thought I had built. The changes were irreversible, etched into the landscape of our small town and into the fabric of our souls. Yet in the quiet moments, tending my garden, working on a project, watching the sun set over the cornfields, I found small moments of peace. A strength had emerged from the adversity, a quiet resilience I hadn't known I possessed. There was a sense of quiet hope, not for a return to the past, for that was impossible, but for a future built on honesty, on genuine connection, on self-respect. I understood then that while the past could not be undone, the future was still unwritten. It offered a chance to live differently, to choose integrity, to build a life based on what truly mattered. The hard truths of Harvest County had been a brutal lesson, a stark reminder that even in seemingly quiet lives, choices can lead to devastation. But from that devastation, sometimes a profound understanding can emerge, a deeper appreciation for the simple, unvarnished truth.